Today we're going to talk about Jim Crow laws. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln formally issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared freedom for all slaves residing in states who were in rebellion against the federal government. This meant that, at least in the southern states, slavery was considered illegal. The intention of the proclamation was to weaken the South's power and strengthen support for the North during the United States Civil War. While the proclamation was initially purely political, it was seen as an enormous victory and defining moment for slaves throughout the country. However, the idea of freedom in its purest sense was never achieved. Individual states instilled laws known as black codes, which denied blacks the civil and political rights held by whites, including restriction on land ownership, labor, and voting. Clearly, the bitterness of the Civil War remained as organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan surfaced and the conflict over slavery continued. Violence and racism was rampant as newly freed slaves continued their battle for freedom and equality. In June of 1892, a 30-year-old man named Homer Plessy was jailed for sitting in the white section of a railroad car. Plessy was only 1/8 black, but under Louisiana law was considered colored and therefore was required to sit in the colored car. In Homer Adolph Plessy versus the state of Louisiana, Plessy argued that the separation violated the 13th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. John Howard Ferguson, a lawyer from Massachusetts, an acting judge for the Plessy case, found Plessy guilty of refusing to leave the white car. After an unsuccessful appeal to the Supreme Court of Louisiana, which upheld Ferguson's decision, Plessy took his case to the United States Supreme Court. Again, the court found Plessy in violation. The Supreme Court decision allowed the perpetuation of the concept of separate but equal, which legally enabled schools, courthouses, libraries, hotels, theaters, restaurants, public transportation, etc., to segregate colored from whites. This decision would only serve to strengthen the already popular Jim Crow laws, which allowed states to legally impose punishment for those who crossed the racial barriers. Some of the Jim Crow laws are as follows by state. Alabama. All passenger stations in this state operated by any motor transportation company shall have separate waiting rooms and separate ticket windows for white and colored races. Also in Alabama, it should be unlawful for a Negro and a white person to play together or be in company with each other at any game of pool or billiards. In Arizona, the marriage of a person of Caucasian blood with a Negro, Mongolian, Malay, or Hindu shall be null and void. And in Florida, the schools for white children and the schools for Negro children shall be conducted separately. In Georgia, no colored barber shall serve as a barber to a white woman or children. And in North Carolina, books shall not be interchangeable between the white and colored schools, but shall continue to be used by the race first using them. Again, these are only just a few of several Jim Crow laws that were in effect at the time. In addition to the actual laws, there were also unwritten rules or rules of etiquette that blacks were expected to follow. For example, blacks were expected to refer to whites as Sir, Captain, Mr., or Mrs., while whites often referred to blacks as nigger, boy, or girl. Also, there were many signs that were put up during that time, and for example, signs in parks that stated Negroes and dogs not allowed were common. The Jim Crow laws remained existent and in force until the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968 finally ended the Jim Crow sanctions.